There are times in life when everything feels heavy. When the heart feels tired, the path feels unclear, and we wonder why peace seems so far away. Tonight, we are going to sit with one of the simplest and most beautiful teachings in Buddhism for moments like these. No mud, no lotus. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The lotus does not grow in clear water. It does not rise from easy conditions. It begins down in the mud, in the dark and hidden places beneath the surface. And from there, slowly, it rises into something beautiful and luminous. This is why the lotus became such a powerful symbol in Buddhism and Zen. Not because it escapes the mud, but because it is nourished by it. This is our exploration tonight. The understanding that the difficult times in life can become the very ground in which peace and compassion emerge. There is nothing you need to solve while you listen. Nothing you need to force into meaning. Just rest and let the teaching meet you where you are. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. When the Buddha gave his very first teaching, he did not promise a life without pain. He began by telling the truth. To be alive is to meet difficulty. There is the pain of losing what we love, of not getting what we long for, of growing old and falling ill, and watching those dear to us change and go. He called this dukkha, and he placed it first, before everything else he taught. This was not bad news. It was honest news. Most of us carry a hidden belief that pain is a sign something has gone wrong, that a smooth and untroubled life is the normal one, and that any hardship is a kind of failure, ours or someone else's. The Buddha lifted that weight. The difficulty is not a mistake. It is part of the path, and everyone walks it, and no one is being singled out. Then he said something more surprising. This very difficulty, the thing we spend our lives trying to avoid, can become the doorway to freedom. The mud, it turns out, is where the flower grows. The teacher Thich Nhat Hanh gave this its plainest form in 4 words. No mud, no lotus. Let us explore a story about this. There was once a wide green valley with a great river running through the middle of it. Every spring, when the snows melted in the far mountains, the river rose over its banks and spread across the fields. It soaked the low ground, and when it drew back, it left a thick layer of brown mud behind. The people of the valley dreaded that season. The flood broke their fences and crept into their stores. When it left, they faced weeks of heavy work, planting again into the muck and repairing what the water had carried off. Year after year, they cursed the river. One spring the water rose higher than anyone had expected. It carried off a young woman's newly built fence and most of the grain her family had saved. She stood in her doorway and watched the brown water climb the step, and she promised herself that one day she would live somewhere the river could never reach. One old farmer, whose family had worked the same fields for many generations, would sit with the young ones in the evenings and listen to them complain. "If only the river would stay in its banks," the young woman said one night. "We could build proper houses close to the water. We would never have to start over again each spring." The old farmer smiled but said little. He had heard his own father say the same words, and his grandfather before that. Then one year, far upstream where no one in the valley could see, a great piece of the mountainside broke loose and slid into the gorge, blocking the river like a wall. That spring the snows melted as they always did, but the water never came. The fields stayed dry. The stores stayed clean. The valley rejoiced. "At last," the young woman said, laughing as she stood in the dry riverbed. "The river has set us free." The old farmer walked to the edge of his field and looked at the cracked ground where the flood used to reach. He did not laugh. "We will see," he said. The first harvest was as good as any they could remember. The people praised their good fortune, and the old farmer's caution was forgotten. But the second harvest came up a little thinner. He noticed it first. In the evenings he walked his rows, rubbing the soil between his fingers, frowning at something he could not yet name. "It is nothing," the young woman said when she saw his face. "One poor year. The weather, perhaps." "Perhaps," he answered. But he did not believe it. By the end of that season, others had begun to notice too. The baskets came in lighter. The grain did not keep as well in the stores. At the well one morning, a neighbor stopped the old farmer and asked, half joking, whether he had somehow offended the spirits of the field. "No," the old farmer said, "but I think we may have lost a friend and not yet know it." The neighbor laughed and walked on. He did not understand. The old farmer was not sure he understood it fully himself. Not yet. By the third spring, the crops rose pale and short, the grain small and hard inside the husk. The old farmer knelt and took up a handful of his soil, and it crumbled into dry dust and blew off his open palm in the wind. The young woman came to him, troubled. "The land is dying," she said. "We have done nothing differently. Why has the soil turned to dust?" The old farmer let the last of the dust fall from his hand. "The flood was never our enemy," he said. "Every spring the river carried down fresh earth from the high mountains and laid it over our fields. That brown mud we cursed was feeding us the whole time. We called it our hardship. It was a gift we did not know how to see." The young woman looked out over the pale, struggling fields. "My grandmother used to thank the river," she said, slowly. "I never understood why. I thought she was being foolish. She understood what the rest of us forgot," he said. "Now we can only wait and hope it remembers us." In time the river did return. Far upstream the fallen rock broke apart, and the next spring the water rose again and spread its brown flood across the valley. This time the people did not curse it. They stood at the edges of their fields and watched the muddy water move slowly over the land. The young woman stood beside the old farmer. She remembered the promise she had made years before in her doorway, to live one day somewhere the river could never reach, and she almost smiled at it now. "All those years I wanted to be free of it," she said. "So did I, once," the old farmer answered. "So did my father and his father." They watched the water settle into the low fields, carrying its dark gift of earth down from the high mountains. The same river, the same flood, the same mud, a different heart meeting it. The people of that valley spent lifetimes resenting the very thing that fed them. We do the same more often than we know. The difficulty we most want gone may be the very thing enriching the soil of a life in ways we cannot see while we are still standing in the middle of it. Many people, looking back, find that the season they would never choose to repeat was also the season that made them who they are. This is the heart of what the Buddha pointed to with the lotus. It is said that after his awakening, he looked out across the world and saw all people as lotuses in a great pond. Some were still deep beneath the surface, held in the dark water. Some had risen partway and were reaching toward the light. A few had broken through and opened fully in the sun. He did not see some flowers as good and others as bad. He saw one process, the same in every flower. Each was rising, in its own time, from the same mud toward the same light. Not one of them skipped the mud. Every bloom that ever opened began down in the dark and grew up through it. There is a reason the lotus became this picture, and not some bright flower of the meadow. It roots in muck, in the soft and decaying matter at the bottom of the pond, and it feeds on exactly that. Yet when it opens, nothing of the mud clings to it. The petals shed the water and the silt completely. The Buddha once described himself this way. As a lotus is born in the water and rises above it unsoiled, he said, so a person can live in the midst of the world and not be stained by it. Born of the mud, rising through it, unspoiled by it. His own life showed it. When the Buddha finally found what he had searched for, he did not find it by escaping the world or rising above his pain. He found it by sitting down in the middle of his own fear and sorrow beneath a tree and refusing to look away until he had seen all the way through it. His freedom grew out of the very thing he had once tried to flee. He did not stop at naming the difficulty either. He taught that it has a cause, that it can ease, and that there is a way of living that leads through it toward freedom. This was the ground of everything he offered for the rest of his life. He was not a teacher of escape. He was a teacher of how to meet what comes, fully and without turning away, and to be opened by it, rather than broken. The Buddhist teacher, Pema Chodron, offers a sharp picture of this same path. We tend to imagine awakening as a mountain we climb, going up and up toward a bright peak of calm, leaving the heavy things below. She says we have it upside down. The path runs downward, into the mountain, not up it. Down through our defenses and our pretending, into what is raw and real, until at the very bottom we meet something we did not expect to find. A steadiness that was there the whole time. A love that does not break, waiting underneath the very things we were trying to escape. None of this means that pain is good, or that loss is secretly a blessing. The Buddha never told anyone to go looking for suffering. He said only that difficulty is woven into every life, and that there is a way of meeting it that opens the heart instead of closing it. Pain that we only fight tends to harden into bitterness. That same pain, met with presence, can soften us, deepen us, and turn us with real care toward everyone else who suffers, which in the end means everyone. The Dhammapada, one of the oldest collections of the Buddha's words, begins by saying that everything we experience is shaped first in the mind. The life we meet is colored by the heart we bring to it. So it is not the flood that decides our peace. It is the heart that meets the flood. Let us turn to another story. A young man once came to his grandmother worn down by his troubles. Nothing in his life seemed to go the way he wished. One hardship would ease, and another would rise to take its place, and he was tired of fighting them. I do not know how much more I can take, he told her. Every time I settle one thing, another breaks. I am ready to give up. His grandmother listened without a word. Then she rose and set 3 pots of water over the fire to boil. Into the first she dropped a firm white root from her garden. Into the second she lowered an egg. Into the third she spooned a handful of dried tea leaves. She let all 3 sit above the flame and said nothing at all. The young man waited, confused and a little impatient. He had come for counsel, not for cooking. After a time, his grandmother lifted the root from the first pot and set it on a plate. She drew the egg from the second and laid it beside the root. Then she poured the steaming tea from the third pot into a clay cup. She turned to him. "Tell me what you see," she said. "A root, an egg, and a cup of tea," he answered. She asked him to press the root. It gave way at once under his fingers, soft and falling apart. She asked him to peel the egg. He cracked the shell and found that the soft inside had grown firm and hard. Then she asked him to drink the tea. He lifted the cup, breathed in its warmth, and tasted it, and a small smile came to him despite his mood. "What does it mean?" he asked. "Each of these met the same boiling water," she said, "but each met it in its own way. The root went in strong and came out weak. The heat wore it down until it fell apart in your hand. The egg went in soft and tender and came out hard. The same heat closed it and made it stiff." She lifted the clay cup, but the tea leaves did not soften and fall apart, and they did not harden and close, she said. They met the hot water and gave themselves to it. They turned the very thing that was meant to wear them down into something warm and fragrant, something that gives comfort to whoever drinks it. The water did not change the leaves so much as the leaves changed the water. The young man looked down at the cup in his hands. "When the hard times come, and they will come," his grandmother said, "you do not get to choose the heat. You only choose what you become inside it. Will you let it weaken you until you fall apart? Will you let it harden you until nothing soft is left? Or will you meet it so that something good comes out of you, even there, even then?" The young man said nothing, but he held the warm cup for a long while, and he carried his grandmother's question with him for the rest of his days. The same loss can close one heart and crack another one open. A long illness can leave one person brittle and make another person kind. The event is only half the story. The other half is how we meet it, and that half belongs to us. The shift is a small one, but it changes the ground beneath us. It moves from "this should not be happening to me" toward "this too is the path." From fighting the season toward letting it do its slow work in us. This does not mean we stop caring, or stop acting, or pretend that loss does not hurt. It hurts. It means we set down the extra burden of believing that our whole life has gone wrong because one part of it has turned hard. This is not the same as giving up. It is easy to mistake acceptance for defeat, as though to stop fighting a hard season were simply to surrender to it. But there is a real difference between resignation and acceptance. Resignation is heavy and closed. It says that nothing matters, so there is no use trying. Acceptance is open and awake. It says that this is what is here now, and I will meet it with everything I have. The Zen tradition speaks of meeting each moment with a clear and willing heart, neither clinging to what we wish for, nor shoving away what we are given. That is not weakness. It is a quieter kind of strength, and often a harder one. The valley could not choose whether the river flooded. That was never in their hands. What they could choose, in the end, was how they stood at the edge of their fields, and what they let themselves see in the water. That choice changed everything, though the river itself never changed at all. So here is something to carry lightly into the days ahead. When a hard moment comes, and the old feeling rises that your life has failed, or wandered off course, it may be possible to loosen that grip, even a little. Not to be glad about the difficulty, only to consider, for the length of one breath, that this too might be the path. That the mud you are standing in may be feeding a root you cannot yet see. The lotus does not bloom on its first day. but something is being fed down in the dark, even now. Take a moment here to simply be still. Let the breath rise and fall on its own, and carry on whenever you feel ready. One of the first things the Buddha taught was that nothing stays the same. Everything that arises will pass away. The seasons turn, the body changes, joy comes and goes, and so does sorrow. We usually hear this teaching as a warning about loss, a reminder that the good days will not last. And that is true. But it carries something hopeful folded inside it as well. If nothing lasts, then the hard times do not last either. No winter is forever. Every season, however bleak, is already on its way to becoming the next. There are stretches in a life when it feels as though nothing is happening at all. Not sharp pain, exactly, but a kind of barrenness. A fallow season, when the work we put in seems to bear no fruit, when we feel stalled and dry and unsure we are growing at all. We look around at others who seem to be flowering, and we wonder, what is wrong with us, that our own field lies empty? No one looks at a winter field and calls it a failure. The farmer knows that the bare ground is not dead. It is resting. Beneath the frost, the soil is recovering its richness. The roots of the trees are reaching deeper in the dark, and the seeds are waiting, holding their life folded inside them for the moment that is right. Winter is not the absence of growth. It is growth that has gone underground, out of sight. The Buddha once spoke about this kind of patience. He was asked why, if his teaching was so clear and his path so good, some people walked it all the way to freedom, while others did not. He answered with the image of a farmer. A good farmer levels his field, he said, and works the soil, and plants his seed, and waters it with care. But he cannot then command the seed, sprout today, ripen by this evening. That is not in his power. The growth keeps its own hidden time, underground, in the dark, on its own schedule, and not the farmer's. The farmer's task is to prepare the ground and tend it faithfully and wait. The growing is not his to hurry. So it is with us. In a barren season, the temptation is to force something, to tear at the ground and demand that it produce. But the deeper work cannot be rushed. What is asked of us is to keep tending in small and faithful ways, and to trust the slow, unseen work going on beneath the surface. Patience, in the Buddhist teaching, is not dull waiting or gritted teeth. It is counted among the great strengths of the heart, a willingness to stay with what is, without forcing it to be otherwise. The Buddha once described his whole path as deepening gradually, the way the floor of the sea slopes down little by little, with no sudden drop anywhere along the way. Nothing in it is hurried. And the person who learns to wait without despair, the way a farmer waits through the long turning of the year, has already found something the restless and the hurried never reach. There is an old story about this. There was once a young man who came to study under the keeper of a great orchard, a woman who had tended its trees for 50 years. In the spring, he planted a row of young trees with his own hands, watering them, watching the first leaves unfold, proud of the work. Through the summer they grew. In the autumn their leaves turned gold and fell. And by deep winter the little trees stood bare and brown and stiff against the grey sky, and the young man was certain he had killed them. He went to the old keeper, miserable. "The trees I planted are dead," he said. "Not one leaf left on them. The branches are dry. I have failed them." The old woman did not seem troubled. "Come," she said, and she led him out into the cold orchard. She knelt at the foot of one of his little trees and, with her fingers, brushed away the frost and the top layer of dark soil from around its base. "Dig here," she said. Softly, the young man knelt and dug with his hands into the cold earth until he reached a root. The old woman told him to look closely. There, beneath the surface, the root was pale and firm and alive, and from it fine new threads of growth reached out into the soil, white and tender. "Now feel here," she said, and she guided his hand to a branch he had thought was dead. She showed him a small swelling along it, a bud, tight and hard and sealed against the cold. "Inside that," she said, "next spring's leaf is already waiting. It was formed in the autumn. It will rest all winter and open when the time comes." The young man stared at the bare tree with new eyes. "But it looks as though nothing is happening," he said. "That is because the work is happening where you cannot see it," she answered. "The tree is not idle. In the warm months it grew upward, toward the light. Now, in the cold, it grows downward, into the dark, sending its roots deeper so that it can stand taller and drink more deeply in the years to come. A tree that was never allowed a winter would have shallow roots. The first strong wind would take it down. The winter is not the enemy of the tree. The winter is making the tree strong enough to live." "How long must it sleep like this?" the young man asked. "As long as the season lasts," she said. "Not a day longer and not a day less. The tree does not argue with the winter, and it does not try to bloom before its time. It simply waits and trusts, and when the warmth returns it is ready, and it opens all at once. You would do well to learn from it." The young man covered the root again with soil, carefully, as if tucking it back to sleep. He never again mistook a resting thing for a dead one. We are quick to judge our barren seasons as proof that we have failed. We measure our lives by what we can show, by what is visible and finished and bright. But a great deal of what matters in a person is formed in the seasons when nothing shows. Grief does its slow work in us out of sight. A hard year deepens our roots without ever announcing it. We come through some long, dim stretch and only much later realize how much stronger we have become, though at the time it felt as if we were simply lost. These fallow seasons take many shapes. There is the emptiness after a loss, when the days feel flat and colorless, and we cannot imagine caring about anything again. There is the long pause after something ends, a piece of work, a chapter of life, a way of being that no longer fits, when the next thing has not yet appeared, and we stand in between, with nothing to hold. There is the slow recovery from an illness, the quiet years of raising a small child, the stretch of simply not knowing what comes next. From the outside, and often from the inside too, these times can look like a person standing still. They are almost never standing still. Something is being prepared. There is a parable about a gardener who, anxious to know whether his seeds were growing, kept digging them up to check. Each time he uncovered them, he disturbed the young roots, and in his impatience he killed the very thing he was trying to help. The seed does not need to be inspected. It needs to be left in the dark and trusted. Our own growth is often like this. It cannot bear constant uprooting and measuring. It asks for patience and a certain faith in what we cannot yet see. The old festivals of midwinter understood this. They lit their fires and their candles on the longest, darkest night of the year, not in despair but in calm confidence, because the shortest day is also the turning point. At the very moment the dark is deepest, the light has already begun, by minutes, to return. Nothing announces it. The cold often grows worse before it eases. But the turn has been made. In the bleakest part of the season, spring is already, invisibly, on its way. Here is another story. A young man once received from an old woman of his village a handful of slender shoots which she told him to plant at the edge of his land. "These will become a grove of great bamboo," she said, "taller than your house, strong enough to build with, beautiful to sit beneath. But you must water them every day, and you must be patient, for they take their time." The young man planted the shoots and watered them. The first year, nothing rose from the ground. He watered them still. The second year, nothing. His neighbors began to laugh at the sight of him, carrying water each morning to a patch of bare earth. "There is nothing there," one neighbor said. "You are watering dust. The old woman has tricked you." "She did not seem like someone who would trick me," the young man answered. And he kept watering. The third year came, and the patch of earth was as bare as ever. The neighbors no longer laughed. Now they shook their heads with something like pity, and some of them grew unkind. "A grown man watering an empty field," they said to one another. "He should be planting grain like the rest of us, not chasing an old woman's story." The young man heard them. On the hard mornings, when the wind was cold and his arms ached and the ground showed nothing, he half believed them. More than once he stood over the bare earth with his full pail and thought of simply pouring it out and walking away. The fourth year passed, and still not a single green shoot broke the soil. The young man's faith wore thin. He went to the old woman, tired and ready to give up. "4 years," he said. 4 years of carrying water to nothing. There is not one sprout to show for it. Tell me honestly, is there anything alive under that ground at all?" The old woman smiled. "Go home," she said, "and water them one more season. Then decide." He almost did not. But something in her calm sent him back to his patch of bare earth, and he lifted his pail again. And in the 5th year, the bamboo came. It did not come slowly. One morning there was a single green spear pushing up through the soil. Within days there were many. And then they rose, faster than he could believe, a hand's width and more each day, climbing past his knees, past his waist, past his head, until by the end of the season, a grove of tall green bamboo swayed where the bare ground had been, just as the old woman had promised. The young man went to her, amazed. 5 years of nothing, he said, and then all of it at once. "How?" "It was never nothing," she said. "All those years, while you saw bare ground, the plants were growing downward instead of up. They were building their roots, spreading them wide and deep beneath the soil, making a foundation strong enough to hold all the height that was coming. If they had shot up tall in the first year, with no roots to hold them, the first storm would have flattened them. They were not refusing to grow. They were getting ready to grow. The waiting was the growing." Most of us are living, at one time or another, in one of those root-building years. A season when we pour ourselves into something and see nothing come of it. A stretch of life that feels like bare ground. And the doubt creeps in. the voice that says nothing is happening, that the effort is wasted, that we should give up. It does no good to scold the winter for being winter. The season is not a verdict on your worth, any more than the bare orchard was a judgment on the young man who planted it. The Buddha's teaching on impermanence is not only that all things end, it is also that all things turn. Night turns toward morning. The tide goes out and comes back in. The breath leaves and returns on its own. A life that has gone dim and still is not a life that has stopped. It is a life in one of its turnings, and a turning, by its very nature, does not hold still. The Buddhist path takes a long view of this. Growth of the heart is rarely sudden or showy. It happens the way the bamboo grows, mostly underground, mostly unseen, root by root, until one season it rises. What looks like an empty winter is very often a deep preparation. The mud and the dark are not delays on the way to the flower. They are where the flower is being made. This is why Zen students can sit for years in what looks, from the outside, like stillness and silence, with no dramatic sign of anything happening at all. They are not waiting for a sudden flash of light. They are trusting that the practice is doing its slow work in them, below the level of what the eye can see, the way the bamboo builds its roots through all those empty-seeming years. So in a fallow season, the practice is not to force a bloom. It is to keep watering, to keep tending the small, faithful things, the daily care that seems to produce nothing, and to trust that beneath the surface, in the dark where you cannot watch, the roots are reaching down. The season will turn. It always turns. And what was built in the stillness of the winter will hold up everything that comes after. There is no need to know exactly when. The young man with his bamboo did not know whether the green would come in the 5th year or the 6th or ever. He only kept lifting his pail. That is the whole of it. We tend what is ours to tend. We let the dark do its slow and hidden work, and we trust that the same earth that buries the seed is also feeding it. Rest for a little while now. There is nothing to reach for and nothing to fix, only the breath, coming and going in its own time. The Buddha taught that our suffering does not come only from the hard things that happen to us. A great deal of it comes from the way we react to them. He pointed to 3 habits of the heart that turn pain into something heavier than it needs to be. There is grasping, the reaching after what we want. There is aversion, the pushing away of what we do not want. And there is confusion, the not seeing clearly what is actually here. These 3, he said, are the roots of most of our trouble. Sometimes they are called the 3 fires, because they burn, and because they spread from one moment to the next, if nothing stops them. We tend to think our troubles come at us entirely from the outside. Something happens, and we suffer, and the cause looks obvious. The Buddha turned the attention inward instead, not to blame us for our own pain, but to show us where our freedom actually lies. We cannot always change what happens to us. We can, with practice, change the fire we meet it with. And that turns out to make all the difference. When a difficult season comes, these reactions rise on their own, before we have even chosen them. Yet it is not the difficulty itself that pulls us under. It is our thrashing against it. A person caught in soft mud who holds still can usually be helped out. A person who panics and fights and flails only works himself deeper. The mud is the same in both cases. The struggle is what sinks us. there are a few familiar ways we get stuck. One is blame. The moment something goes wrong, the mind goes hunting for someone at fault, ourselves or another, as though naming the guilty one would somehow undo the harm. Another is speed. We fill every hour, we hurry, we pile on tasks and errands and noise, moving fast enough that we never have to feel what waits underneath. And another is escape. We reach for whatever numbs us, whatever lets us not be present to the ache. Each of these is understandable. Each is deeply human. And each one carries us away from the single place where the difficulty could actually be met, which is our own open heart. Consider a story about this. There was once a hermit who lived alone in a cave high in the mountains, devoted to long stretches of meditation. One evening he returned from gathering wood and found his cave full of shadowy shapes. They gathered in the dark corners, dim and many and unsettling, as if his own worries and fears had taken on form and quietly moved into his home. His first response was to want them gone. "This is my cave," he said to them. "You do not belong here." The shapes did not stir. He waved his arms and clapped his hands and told them again to leave. They only seemed to settle in more firmly, watching him from the shadows. So he tried to drive them out. He rushed at them, waving a branch, sweeping at the dark corners. But the shapes could not be touched. His swings passed straight through them, and where there had been a few, now there seemed to be more, as though they grew stronger the harder he fought. Worn out, he tried to bargain. He pleaded with them. He offered them things. He asked them, again and again, to go. They stayed. He thought of leaving the cave altogether, of giving up his home to them and never coming back. But somehow he understood that they would only follow him wherever he went. He stood at the mouth of the cave, breathing hard, and for the first time, he grew still enough to truly look at the shapes. They were strange, and they unsettled him. But they were not coming closer. They were not doing anything at all. They were simply there. It was his own struggle against them that had filled the cave with so much noise and fear. At last, worn out and out of every strategy, the hermit did something different. He stopped fighting. He sat down on the floor of his cave, right there among the dim shapes, and he let them be. "If this is my home tonight," he said, "then it is your home too. Stay if you must. I will build us a fire." And he turned toward the hearth and built up his small fire and set water to boil and made tea and offered it to them the way he would to any guest who had come in cold from the dark. And something quietly shifted. As he stopped resisting them, the shapes began to soften and fade. One by one they grew thin and pale, like mist in the morning sun, until the cave was simply a cave again, bare and still, and his own. He had not driven them out. He had stopped fighting them, and in his stillness they had nothing left to feed on, and they melted away. The shapes in the cave are the difficult feelings any of us meet when life turns hard. The fear, the grief, the shame, the anger, and the hermit's mistakes are our mistakes. We shout at these feelings to leave. We struggle against them, and the struggle only seems to multiply them. We try to bargain, to flee, to drown them out, so we will not have to feel them. None of it works, because the one thing these feelings cannot survive is being met with a steady and unafraid presence. This is the heart of what the Buddha understood about aversion, about our pushing away. The pain of a difficult experience is one thing, But our frantic resistance to that pain is a second suffering laid on top of the first, often heavier than the first, and one that we add entirely ourselves. To stop fighting a feeling is not to surrender to it or be defeated by it. It is to stop pouring oil on the fire. A feeling that is allowed to be felt without panic tends to move through us and ease the way weather moves across a sky. A feeling that we wall up and battle stays locked in place, pounding to get out. The Buddha pointed to this difference again and again. He did not teach people to feel less or to harden themselves against their own lives. He taught them to feel fully and to stop heaping the second struggle on top of the first. A grief that is simply grieved is heavy, but it moves and it lightens. A grief that we refuse, that we clamp down on and fight, becomes something stuck and sour that can sit inside a person for years. Zen makes the same point in the way it teaches sitting. The instruction is not to wrestle your thoughts into silence or to chase the difficult ones out. It is to let them arise and pass like clouds drifting across the sky, watched but not grabbed, not battled. A cloud you struggle against only seems to thicken and darken. A cloud you simply allow will, in its own time, move along. Slowly, the mind learns that it does not have to fight its own weather. Blame works in much the same way. When pain comes, the mind reaches for someone to hold responsible, believing on some level that this will help. It never does. Blame is a way of staying at war with what has already happened, of refusing to let it be over. It keeps the wound open and the heart clenched tight. There is an image often used in the Buddhist tradition for this kind of anger. Holding on to it, they say, is like picking up a burning coal to throw at someone else. Long before it ever reaches the other person, it is your own hand that is burned. There is another story that shows this plainly. Two brothers were once driving a loaded cart along a country road when a heavy rain turned the way to mud. At a low place, the wheels sank deep and the cart stopped fast, mired up to its axles. The ox strained against the harness and could not pull it free. The older brother lost his temper at once. He shouted at the ox. He hauled at the harness. He cursed the rain and cursed the road and cursed the man who had built such a poor road and cursed his brother for agreeing to travel on a day like this. He threw his shoulder against the back of the cart with all his strength, red in the face, heaving and yelling. But all his shoving only rocked the wheels and worked them deeper until the cart sat lower in the mud than it had before. "Why are you just standing there?" He snapped at his younger brother, gasping for breath. "Come and push." "In a moment," the younger one answered. "First I am looking." The younger brother said nothing for a while. He stepped back and studied the cart and the mud and the lay of the road. Then he walked to the trees at the roadside and gathered fallen branches and a few flat stones. He knelt down in the mud, unhurried, and packed the branches and stones beneath the sunken wheels, building something firm for them to climb onto. He went to the ox and spoke to it in a low, steady voice until the animal calmed and stood still. Then he set his shoulder to the cart, not in a frenzy but with one well-timed push, and called for his brother to push with him. The wheels caught on the packed branches, rolled up out of the hollow, and the cart came free onto solid ground. The older brother, soaked and filthy and gasping for breath, stared at it. "How?" he said. "I pushed twice as hard as you did." "You pushed against the mud," the younger brother answered, wiping his hands. "I looked first at what the mud needed. The road was not your enemy. The rain was not your enemy. They were simply what they were. Once I stopped fighting them and started working with them, the way out was not so hard to find. The older brother looked at the firm ground beneath the wheels, and at the branches his brother had laid down, and at his own raw and aching hands, and for once he had nothing to say. The older brother's frenzy points to another of our common escapes, one so ordinary that we seldom notice it for what it is. When something hurts, we speed up. We fill the day so full that there is no empty moment left in which the feeling might catch us. We take on more work, we talk more, we move faster, we reach for one task and then the next, and then the next. From the outside it can look like coping, even like strength and diligence. But very often it is simply running. The faster we go, the less we have to feel, and the further we drift from the very heart that could meet the pain and soften it. There is an old recognition in the tradition that a restless, busy mind is a clouded one. It cannot settle enough to see what is truly here, and so it never arrives at the peace it is racing toward. Close beside this is the urge to numb. When staying present with a feeling seems more than we can bear, we look for something to dull it. There are countless ways, some loud and some quiet, and most of us know our own without being told. None of them are wicked. Every one of them is an attempt to find a little relief from what aches. But they work like a hand pressed hard over a wound. They cover the pain without ever tending it, and underneath, untouched, the thing we will not feel goes on waiting for us. What numbs us cannot heal us. Only presence heals, and presence asks the one hard thing, which is to feel what is actually there. We cannot keep the hard things from coming. The rain falls, the road turns to mud, the cart sinks. That much is never in our hands. What is in our hands is whether we meet it raging and blaming and thrashing, sinking ourselves deeper, or whether we can stop long enough to see clearly and then respond. Between the difficulty and our reaction there is always a small space, and in that space is nearly all our freedom. The pause before the shout, the breath before the blame. The moment we notice the old pull to rush off or to numb ourselves, and choose, instead, to stay. This is not something anyone masters all at once. The reactions are old and strong, and they will keep rising. But each time we catch one, even a little late, even after we have already begun to thrash, we can set it down. We can stop fighting the mud. And in that stillness, the way through, which was hidden the whole time by our struggling, begins to show itself. There is a small practice hidden in all of this, and it is available in any hard moment. When you feel the heat rising, the urge to lash out, or to flee, or to fill the silence with anything at all, you can pause before the next move and take a single breath. Just one. Feel your feet on the ground, or the weight of your body, or the air going in and out. That one breath will not solve the problem in front of you, but it reopens the space. It is the whole difference between the brother who flung himself at the cart and the brother who stepped back to look. From that small opening, a wiser response can come, one that works with the difficulty instead of against it. There is a line in the Dhammapada that an ill-directed mind can do a person far more harm than any enemy. Our own reactions, left to run unchecked, wound us more deeply than the trouble that set them off. The blaming, the rushing, the numbing, all of them are ways of refusing the mud. And the lotus cannot grow without the mud. When we fight the difficult feeling, or run from it, or smother it, we imagine we are protecting ourselves. We are pulling up the very roots from which something good could have grown. Staying present in the difficulty, without panic, and without blame is the very thing that lets the lotus grow. The thrashing only sinks us deeper. The stillness is what sets us free. Let everything be just as it is for a moment. Feel the weight of the body, held and at rest, and when you feel settled, we will go on. The Buddha once put a simple question to his students. If a person is struck by an arrow, he asked, "Is that painful?" "Yes," they said. "And if that same person is struck by a second arrow in the very same spot, is that more painful still?" "Of course," they answered. Then he explained what he meant. "In this life," he said, "we are all struck by the first arrow. That is the pain that comes simply from being alive. Loss, illness, disappointment, the hard things that reach everyone sooner or later. We do not get to choose whether the first arrow comes. But most of us do not stop there. When the first arrow lands, we reach for a second arrow and drive it into the same wound. And then a third, and a fourth. The second arrow is the blame, the resentment, the long bitter story we tell about what the pain means. It is my fault. I should have known better. I always ruin things. There is something wrong with me. The first arrow is the pain itself. The second arrow is what we do to ourselves on top of it. The Buddha was not saying we should feel nothing. The first arrow is real, and it hurts, and there is no shame in that. He was pointing to something else, something freeing. He saw that most of our suffering, the part that lingers and festers and follows us for years, is not the first arrow at all. It is the second one, the one we fire into ourselves. And that arrow, unlike the first, is not inevitable. It can be set down. For many of us, the second arrow takes the shape of a harsh voice inside, a judge that never rests. When something goes wrong, the voice does not say, "That was hard." It says, "You are a failure." It speaks to us in a way we would never speak to a person we loved. We would not dream of saying to a struggling friend the things we say to ourselves a dozen times before breakfast. And we tell ourselves this cruelty is somehow deserved, even useful, as if being hard enough on ourselves will keep us safe from the next mistake. The second arrow rarely stops at one. A single misstep becomes a verdict. We move from, "I did a careless thing," to, "I am careless," from, "That went badly," to, "I always fail," from one bad afternoon to a whole story about who we are. The pain of the moment was real, and it would have passed. The story we build on top of it does not pass so easily. It hardens into a belief, and we carry that belief for years, mistaking it all the while for the truth. When we fire the second arrow, we are no longer simply standing in the mud of a hard time. We are thrashing in it. The pain alone might have softened us and deepened us. The self-punishment only hardens us. The lotus cannot grow in a heart that is at war with itself. A story is told about this. There was once a school of archery led by an old master known less for the strength of his arm than for the stillness of his mind. Among his students was a young man of real talent, whose arrows often flew straight and true. But whenever he missed the mark, even by a little, something came over him. He would curse under his breath, strike his own thigh with his fist, and mutter that he was hopeless, useless, that he would never be good enough. And the strange thing was that after each of these moments, his next several shots would scatter wide, far worse than the first miss had been. One afternoon, the old master watched him do this through an entire round, and then called the young man to sit beside him. "Tell me," the master said, "when your arrow misses, how many arrows have struck you?" The young man did not understand. "One, master. The one I shot." "No," said the old man. "The arrow that missed the target, that is one. But then I watched you take up a second arrow, and a third, and a 10th, and bury every one of them in your own chest. The curse, the blow to your leg, the voice telling you that you are hopeless. Your first arrow missed the target of straw and harmed no one at all. The arrows that came after, you aimed straight at your own heart, and every single one of them found its mark." The young man was silent. "A miss is nothing," the master went on. "Every archer who ever lived has missed 10,000 times. The miss is not your enemy. What you do to yourself after the miss, that is what ruins your aim. You are so busy punishing yourself for the last shot that you have no stillness left for the next one. Set down the second arrow, and the first will not trouble you for long." The young man went back to the line. The next time his arrow flew wide, he felt the old curse rising in him, the urge to strike his own leg. But he remembered the master's words, and he let it pass. He drew a slow breath and raised his bow and let the next arrow fly. To his surprise, it struck the center of the target, not because he had punished himself into it, but because, for the first time, he had not. Most of us are that young archer. The first miss, the first failure, the first hard turn of events is rarely what undoes us. It is the barrage that follows, the self-attack, the merciless replaying of what we should have done. We believe, somewhere deep down, that the punishment is just, even necessary. But a heart braced against its own blows has no steadiness left for whatever comes next. In the Zen tradition of archery, students spend years training not mainly to sharpen their aim, but to quiet the mind, because a mind crowded with judgment and grasping cannot release a clean shot. The arrow flies truest when the anxious, grasping self steps out of the way and lets it go. A life works much the same. Our clearest and kindest actions rarely come from the part of us that is busy scolding and bracing. They come from the still place underneath all of that. The Buddha, who saw the human heart clearly, once said something that can be difficult to take in. He said that you could search the whole wide world for someone more deserving of your kindness than yourself, and you would never find them. Not your dearest friend, not your own child. No one is more deserving of your care than you are. Something in us resists this, because we have been taught that to be easy on ourselves is weakness or self-indulgence. But the second arrow is not discipline. It is only another wound, and no one was ever healed by being wounded more. It can help to ask where the harsh voice even came from. Almost no one is born speaking to themselves with contempt. We learned it somewhere, from someone, and then we kept the habit alive long after they were gone, doing to ourselves what we once feared others would do to us. The voice feels like our own, and feels like simple truth, but it is only an old habit of the mind. And habits, however old and worn, can be unlearned. There is a line in the Dhammapada that says we are our own refuge, our own protector. It is meant as encouragement, but it points both ways. If we can be our own refuge, we can also be our own tormentor. The same inner voice that might be a shelter becomes, for many of us, the harshest judge we will ever stand before. Learning to be a refuge to ourselves, rather than an enemy, is a great part of the work. Setting down the second arrow does not mean pretending we did nothing wrong or refusing to learn from a mistake. We can see a fault plainly and feel honest sorrow over it and still not reach for the whip. In truth, we learn far better from steady, kind attention than from self-contempt, which clouds the mind and makes the very same mistakes more likely the next time. There is another story like it. There was once a potter who lived at the edge of a village, a man who had shaped fine pots and bowls for most of his life. Years before, on a night when he had let himself grow tired and careless, he tended his kiln poorly. The fire ran too hot, and an entire season's work cracked and spoiled in the flames. It was a hard loss. His family went without a great deal that year, and they felt it keenly. But the loss itself passed, the way losses do. What did not pass was what the potter did to himself. From that night onward, he never allowed himself to forget. Each morning, as he sat at his wheel, he muttered the same words over the wet clay. Careless. Foolish. You ruined everything. You cannot be trusted. 10 years went by, and still, every single day, he fired the same arrow into his own chest. He had grown thin and joyless. His hands, once steady, had begun to tremble. The bowls he made were correct in every measure, yet something warm had quietly gone out of them. One autumn, a wandering monk asked to shelter at the potter's house for a few nights, and the potter, who was kind to everyone but himself, agreed gladly. The monk watched him work and heard him murmur his bitter words over the clay, hour after hour. On the third evening, the monk finally spoke. "May I ask you something?" he said. "How many times did your kiln fail?" The potter frowned. "Once," he said. 10 years ago. One terrible night." "Once," the monk repeated. "And how many times since that night have you told yourself that you are careless and foolish and not to be trusted?" The potter opened his mouth and then slowly closed it. He had never thought to count. He could not count. Every day for 10 years. Thousands upon thousands of times. "The fire failed you a single time," the monk said. "You have failed yourself every day since. The kiln burned one season of pots. Your own words have been burning you for 10 long years. Tell me honestly, which fire has done you the greater harm?" The potter sat down heavily, and for a long while he said nothing, and his eyes grew wet. "I thought," he said at last, "that if I kept punishing myself, I would never be careless again." "And have you been careless again in all this time?" the monk asked. "No, never. I have been so afraid of it." "Then the lesson was already learned 10 years ago," the monk said. "Everything you have done to yourself since has taught you nothing at all. It has only hollowed you out. You may set it down now. You have carried it long enough." The potter had learned his lesson on the very first night. Everything after that was the second arrow, fired again and again into an old wound that could never close because he would not allow it to. Many of us live the same way, returning each day to some failure or loss from years gone by and striking ourselves with it once more, as though the pain were a debt we still owed and could never quite finish paying. But the past cannot be paid back in suffering. No amount of self-punishment reaches back across the years and unbreaks the bowl. It only breaks the one who keeps swinging the hammer. The wound stays open, not because the first arrow was so deep, but because we will not stop pulling it out and driving it in again. The practice here is to notice the second arrow as it rises and to choose not to draw it. When the hard thing happens and the old voice begins, the one that says, "This is your fault, there is something wrong with you," you can come to recognize it for what it is. It is not the truth. It is the second arrow, and you can lower the bow. The first arrow you did not choose. The second one you can. You can feel the pain of the first arrow honestly and kindly, the way you would hold the pain of someone dear to you and let all the others fall from your hands unfired. There is a tenderness in this that takes practice. To meet your own pain the way you would meet a frightened child or a hurt friend, without scolding and without rushing to fix it, simply staying close to it with some warmth. When the first arrow lands, you might rest a hand over your own heart and breathe and let yourself feel the ache without piling words on top of it. This is hard in the way that the most natural things are sometimes hard. But each time you manage it, the old reflex loosens a little, and the kinder one grows a little stronger. None of this happens all at once. The young archer still felt the urge to curse. The potter wept before he could lay his burden down. The second arrow will keep rising, very likely for the rest of your life, because it is an old and well-practiced motion. Freedom is not in never feeling the pull. It is in noticing the pull and more often, choosing to let the arrow stay in your hand. The mud of a mistake or a loss can grow real wisdom and compassion in a person, but only once we stop driving arrows into it. A wound that is met with kindness can close and heal and even bloom. A wound we keep tearing open simply stays a wound. Soften here for a breath or two. Let the shoulders drop, let the jaw loosen, and let yourself be at ease before we move on. There is a word at the very heart of Buddhist practice: mindfulness. In the old language it is called sati, and it means a clear and present awareness. Being here, in this moment, awake to what is actually happening, rather than lost in thought about the past or the future. The Buddha called mindfulness the direct path, the way that leads straight through the middle of our experience toward freedom. The Buddha taught that the past is already gone and the future has not yet come, and that the only place we ever actually live is this present moment. Yet most of us spend very little time here. We rehearse old conversations, we worry forward into things that have not happened, and the present slips past, almost unnoticed. Mindfulness is simply the practice of coming back, again and again, without force, returning to where we already are. It sounds almost too plain to matter, but it changes everything, because this moment, the real one, is the only place where peace, or healing, or anything at all, can actually happen. Zen has a name for this bare, present attention. Sometimes it is simply called just this. Not this moment on the way to a better one, not this while the mind is busy elsewhere, but simply this, exactly as it is, given your whole self. The practice Zen calls Zazen, just sitting, is nothing more than this. Sitting and being completely present, letting thoughts come and go without chasing after them, until presence itself becomes a kind of home you can return to anywhere. Mindfulness is often misunderstood as a way to detach, to step back and watch our own lives from a cool distance. That is not quite it. True presence is not cold. It is warm. It does not hold our pain at arm's length. It draws close to it and meets it fully, the way you might sit close beside a friend who is hurting. And here is the heart of this teaching, the alchemy hidden inside it. When we bring this kind of warm, complete attention to something difficult, the difficulty begins to change. Not because we have fixed it or made it disappear, but because attention itself is a form of care, and what is met with care does not stay the same. There are really two movements happening at once. We go down into the mud, into the actual feeling, the fear, or the grief, or the ache, touching it honestly instead of running from it. And at the same time, we hold it within a wider space, a field of kind awareness that does not drown in it. Down into the difficulty and toward the light, both together. This is what turns mud into lotus. Not escaping the mud and not being swallowed by it, but meeting it with a presence wide enough and warm enough to slowly transform it. Without this presence, the mud stays only mud. We can suffer for years and grow nothing from it. With it, the very same suffering becomes the ground of wisdom and compassion. The difference is not in what happens to us. It is in the quality of the awareness we bring to it. Let us look at a story. There was once a master potter whose finest work was a single tea bowl, plain and perfect, which she had shaped in her youth and kept beside her for many years. It was the most treasured thing in her workshop, and her students knew never to touch it. One day a young apprentice, cleaning a high shelf, knocked the bowl to the floor, where it broke into several pieces. He stood frozen with horror. When the master came in and saw the shards scattered on the stone floor, the apprentice could barely find his voice. "I have destroyed it," he said, trembling. "Your most precious bowl. I will leave the workshop. There is no way to make this right." The master knelt and gathered the broken pieces, one by one, into her hands. She did not shout. She looked at the apprentice, who was near tears, and she said, "Sit down. Watch. I am going to show you something." Over the next many days, the master did not throw the broken bowl away, and she did not try to glue it back into its old shape so that no one would ever notice. Instead, she mixed the lacquer with powdered gold, and with great care, she joined the broken pieces together with this golden seam. She did not hide the cracks. She filled them with gold, so that every place the bowl had broken now ran with a bright vein of it. When she had finished, she set the bowl on the table between them. It was no longer the plain, perfect bowl it had once been. It was something else now. The lines where it had shattered traced across it in shining gold, like rivers seen from a high mountain, and the bowl was, somehow, more beautiful than it had been before. For many years this bowl was perfect and plain, the master said. Now it has been broken and mended, and it is lovelier than it ever was. I would not trade this bowl for the one it used to be. She turned it slowly in the light. We believe that to be broken is to be ruined. But a break is not the end of a thing. It depends entirely on how it is mended. Hide the cracks in shame, and you have only a damaged bowl that you are ashamed of. Fill them with gold, with care and attention, and the very wound becomes the most beautiful part. The apprentice never forgot that day. And in time he came to understand that she had not only been speaking about the bowl. The gold the master poured into the cracks is the loving attention we can bring to our own broken places. Most of us, when we are wounded, do one of two things. We hide the cracks, ashamed of them, presenting an unbroken face to the world while we fall apart behind it. or we collapse into the brokenness, identifying with it so completely that we become nothing but our wound. The way of presence is a third path. We neither hide the break nor drown in it. We turn toward it with warm, careful attention, and that attention is the gold. The art of mending broken things with gold grew up in a culture shaped by Zen, one that had learned to find a particular beauty in what is imperfect, weathered, and marked by time. There is a feeling for this that does not translate neatly into our language, a sense that a thing which bears the signs of its own history, its chips and cracks and careful repairs, is more beautiful, not less, than something flawless and untouched. A life is the same. The unmarked life is not the most beautiful one. The most beautiful life is the one that has been broken and mended with care and wears its gold in the very places where it was once most fragile. This is the alchemy at the center of mindfulness. Attention transforms whatever it touches. A grief that is hidden away festers in the dark. A grief that is fully felt with presence and with kindness slowly changes into something else, into tenderness, into compassion, into a depth that simply was not there before. The crack does not vanish. The loss is still a loss, but the gold runs through it now, and where we were broken, we become, strangely, more whole than we were before we ever broke. This asks something of us, though. The gold does not pour itself. To mend a broken place with attention, we have to be willing to stay near it long enough to feel it, and that is the hard part. The Buddha placed mindfulness of the body and of feeling at the very foundation of his teaching, because the body and its feelings are where our difficulty actually lives, underneath all the stories in our heads. Presence means coming down out of the endless commentary and into the simple, felt truth of what is here. The tightness in the chest, the heaviness, the ache. We do not analyze it or argue with it. We keep it company. And kept company with warmth, it begins, on its own, to soften. The Buddhist tradition does not promise a life with no cracks in it. It promises something better and more honest. That the cracks, met with awareness, can become the very places where the light comes through. One more story shows it. There was once a man of great wealth who had everything he could possibly want, and yet could not find a moment's peace. His mind ran without stopping, chewing over the past, racing ahead into the future, so that even at his own feast table, surrounded by music and friends, he was never truly there. He heard of a teacher who lived simply at the edge of the city, a woman said to carry a peace that nothing could disturb, and he went to her and asked for her secret. The teacher did not lecture him. She filled a wide bowl with water, right up to the very brim, so full that a single careless step would send it over the edge. "There is a festival in the streets today," she said, "the largest of the whole year. I want you to carry this bowl, filled just as it is, all the way through the festival, from this house to the temple at the far end of the city, without spilling one drop." The man thought it a strange request, but he took up the bowl and set out. The streets were packed with people, with dancers and drummers and stalls of steaming food, with bright banners and loud music and every kind of distraction. But the man, watching the trembling surface of the water at the brim, saw none of it. Every step he took was slow and careful. His whole attention rested on the water, on his own balance, on the placing of his next small step. The festival roared all around him, and he passed straight through the middle of it and arrived at the temple with the bowl still full. He returned to the teacher, pleased with himself, "I did it," he said. "Not a single drop." "Tell me," the teacher said, "what did you see at the festival? The famous dancers, the acrobats by the fountain, the 1,000 lanterns?" The man realized he had seen none of it. "I saw nothing," he admitted. "I could only watch the water." "And in all that time," the teacher asked, "carrying the bowl through that great crowd, where was your mind? Was it chewing over yesterday? Racing toward tomorrow?" The man fell quiet. For the length of that whole long walk, his restless mind had been perfectly still. There had been only the water and the next step and the present moment. For the first time in years, he had been entirely where he was. "That stillness," said the teacher, "is the peace you came looking for. It was never somewhere else. It is here, in whatever you are doing, the moment you give it your whole presence. You do not need a brimful bowl. You need only to carry each ordinary moment as though it were one." The man went home, and for a time he forgot. But now and then, washing his hands, or walking in his garden, or listening to a friend, he would remember the bowl, and he would let his whole attention rest on the one thing in front of him. And each time he did, the same stillness returned, as though it had been waiting for him the entire time. We imagine that peace is a place we will reach once our problems are finally solved, once the difficulty is behind us. But the restless man found it in the middle of the loudest festival of the year, simply by being completely present to what he was doing. Peace is not something we find by escaping our lives. It is something we find by entering them fully. This is the practice that turns mud into lotus. When a hard feeling comes, instead of fleeing it or drowning in it, we can bring to it the same whole attention the man brought to his bowl. We can feel it fully, here, in the body, with warmth and without all the commentary. We can pour the gold of our attention into the crack. This does not make the difficulty pleasant, but it changes what the difficulty becomes. Met with presence, the mud begins, little by little, to grow something living. It helps to remember that this is not about reaching some special or mystical state. The man with the bowl was not doing anything extraordinary. He was simply giving his complete attention to one ordinary thing. That is all presence ever is. And it is available in the most ordinary moments, washing a cup, feeling the sun on your face, listening to the rain, just as much as in the hardest ones. Each time we give ourselves fully to what is here, we are practicing the very thing that, when the hard times come, will let us meet them with gold instead of shame. In any moment you can return to this. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel the breath moving in and out. Notice what is actually here, the sounds, the sensations, the feeling in the chest, whatever it happens to be, and meet it with kind attention, the way you would carry a bowl filled to the brim. That attention is the alchemy. It is the gold in the cracks. It is the warm awareness in which even our broken places can grow beautiful, and even our suffering can become the ground of a deeper peace. The mud was never the problem. The only question was ever whether we would meet it asleep or awake. Stay with this moment for a little while. Just the breath, just the body, just this, with nothing that needs to be anywhere else. At the center of the Buddhist path is compassion. It is easy to assume this means only kindness toward others, toward the suffering of the people around us and the wider world. It does mean that. But the tradition is clear that such compassion has to begin somewhere closer to home. It begins with ourselves. There is a practice called metta, or loving kindness, that is among the oldest in Buddhism. In it, a person sends warm wishes outward to all living beings. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you be at peace. But the practice does not begin with all beings. It begins with the one who is practicing. Before you wish these things for anyone else, you turn them toward yourself. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I be at peace. The teachers placed it in this order on purpose. A heart that cannot hold itself with kindness has very little to extend to anyone else. You cannot pour water from an empty cup. Some people hear this and worry that it is a recipe for selfishness, that turning kindness toward ourselves will only make us soft or self-absorbed. The opposite tends to be true. The people who are hardest on themselves are often the ones with the least left over for anyone else, because they are worn out from their own private war. And the people who have made some real peace with their own imperfection are usually the most patient and generous with the imperfections of others. We tend to forgive in others what we have learned to forgive in ourselves. We are gentle with the world to the same degree that we have stopped being cruel within. This runs against much of what we were taught. Many of us are praised for putting ourselves last, for giving and giving until nothing is left. It can look like virtue, but a compassion that leaves yourself out is not whole. It is one step removed, abstract, and often running on fumes. The Buddha was practical about such things. He saw that real compassion has to be felt in the body and the heart, that it must include our own difficulty before it can honestly reach anyone else's. If we cannot sit with what is hard in ourselves, with tenderness rather than contempt, then our care for others stays thin and tires easily. This is why compassion begins in the mud, not in some clean, ideal place where we have finally sorted ourselves out, but right here, in our own unfinished and struggling hearts. The mud is our own pain, our own fear, our own falling short. And the lotus of compassion grows from exactly there, or it does not grow at all. There is a story that speaks to this. There was once a healer, a woman, known throughout her region for the gentleness of her hands. People came to her from many miles away with their fevers and their broken bones and their aching hearts, and to every one of them she gave the same patient care. She would sit through the whole night at a sick child's bedside. She spoke to the frightened and the dying in a voice so kind that people said her presence alone was half the cure. No one was ever turned away from her door, and no one was ever judged. But those who lived in her house saw another side of her. Toward herself, the healer was merciless. When she was tired, she drove herself onward without rest and called herself lazy. When she could not save someone, which happens to every healer who ever lived, she lay awake naming all the ways she believed she had failed them. She ate poorly and slept little, and spoke to herself, in the privacy of her own mind, with a harshness she would never have shown to a stranger. Over the years this wore her thin. Her hands began to ache. Her own health, which she never once tended, began to fail. One winter she fell ill herself, too ill to rise from her bed, and an old friend, a healer from a distant village, came to care for her. This friend sat at her bedside the way she herself had sat at so many others, and listened as the sick woman, even in her fever, scolded herself under her breath. "I am useless lying here," she muttered. "Weak. There is so much I should be doing." The old friend took her hand. "Listen to yourself," she said. If a patient of yours said those words to you, what would you tell them? The healer was quiet. You would tell them to rest, the friend went on. You would tell them that they had done enough, that they were not weak but human, that they deserved to be cared for. You have said these very things to 1,000 frightened people and meant every word. Why is it that the one person you will not say them to is yourself? The sick woman had no answer. She had never once thought to turn her own kindness inward. She had spent her whole life pouring it out toward everyone else, quietly certain that she, alone among all her patients, did not deserve a single drop of it. The friend wiped the healer's brow with a cool cloth, the way the sick woman had done for so many others over the years. You have spent your life teaching people that they are worthy of care, she said. It is time you believed it about the one person who has needed to hear it most. You cannot keep drawing from a well that no one is ever allowed to fill, she went on. Not even you. Especially not you. The healer wept then, not from sorrow exactly, but from something loosening in her that had been held tight for a very long time. And as she slowly recovered that winter, she learned, for the first time in her life, to speak to herself in the voice she had always saved for others. Many of us are that healer. We can be endlessly patient with a struggling friend and bitterly impatient with ourselves. We forgive others easily and ourselves never. We would tell anyone we loved that they deserve rest, that they are doing their best, that they are enough, and we would mean it. Yet the thought of offering ourselves those same words feels almost embarrassing, as though we had not earned them. Self-compassion is not a reward for getting everything right. It is the ground beneath everything else. The Buddhist teachers understood that the kindness we can offer the world is bound up with the kindness we can offer ourselves. The way a tree's reach into the sky depends on its roots in the dark soil. Cut the roots, and the tree may stand for a while, but it is already dying. A person who runs entirely on self-criticism can give a great deal for a time, but something essential is draining out of them, and sooner or later the giving turns brittle or stops altogether. The Zen master Shunryu Suzuki once told his students, with great affection, that each of them was perfect just as they were, and that they could all use a little improvement. Both halves at once, and no contradiction between them. You are already whole, already worthy of kindness, exactly as you are in this moment. And you are also still growing, the way every living thing grows. Self-compassion is the art of holding both of these at the same time, and never using the second as a stick to beat the first. There is a simple practice that comes from this. When you are suffering, you can ask yourself one question. What would I say to a dear friend in this exact situation? And then you can try, awkward as it may feel at first, to say those same words to yourself. Not as a clever trick, but as a real turning of your own warmth in the one direction it almost never flows. There is a fear that if we are kind to ourselves, we will let ourselves off the hook, grow lazy, and stop trying to be better. But it tends to work the other way. It is far easier to look honestly at a fault when you are not terrified of what you will find. The harsh inner judge actually makes us hide from our own mistakes, because to face them means another beating. A kinder heart can afford to see clearly, because seeing no longer means being attacked for it. Compassion does not blur the truth. It makes the truth bearable enough to look at. Another story tells of the same thing. The Buddha once taught using the image of salt, and there is a story that carries his lesson well. An old teacher had a student who came to him often weighed down by bitterness. The young man could not let go of his hurts. Every small slight, every disappointment settled into him and soured, and he spoke of his troubles as though they were slowly crushing him. One morning, instead of answering the young man's complaints, the teacher asked him to fetch a handful of salt. When he returned with it, the teacher told him to stir the whole handful into a cup of water and then to drink it down. The young man did, and grimaced and spat it out. "It is bitter," he said. "Far too much salt. I cannot drink it." The teacher nodded and said nothing. Then he led the young man out of the house and down to the edge of a wide, clear lake. "Now," he said, "throw a handful of salt into the lake, stir it with your hand, and drink from the water." The young man scooped up a handful of lake water and drank. It was cool and clean and fresh. "Could you taste the salt?" the teacher asked. "No," said the young man. "None at all. The pain in your life is like that salt," the teacher said. "Just that much, and no more. But how much of its bitterness you taste depends entirely on what you dissolve it in. When your heart is small and tight, like that cup, even a little pain makes everything bitter, and you can taste nothing else. When your heart grows wide, like the lake, the same pain is still there. Every grain of it remains, but it no longer overwhelms the water. There is room around it now. You can hold it and still taste the sweetness of your life." The young man gazed out across the wide water for a long while. "So how," he asked at last, "do I make my heart a lake instead of a cup?" "That," the old teacher said, "is the whole of the practice. And it begins by being gentle with the one who is hurting, which is you." The young man came to the teacher often after that, but his complaints grew fewer with the years. He had not emptied his life of its salt. No one can. He had simply stopped trying to live inside the cup. The salt of our suffering is real. The Buddha never pretended otherwise. He did not teach a way to take the salt out of a life. He taught a way to grow the vessel that holds it. And that vessel, the spaciousness of a heart that can meet pain without clenching shut, is grown through compassion, beginning with compassion for ourselves. A small, hard heart cannot hold much. Every grief feels like the end of the world because there is no room around it. But a heart made wide by kindness can hold an astonishing amount of pain and still keep room for joy, for other people, for the plain sweetness of being alive. That widening does not come from forcing ourselves to feel less. It comes from learning to hold what we feel with care instead of contempt. The healer learned, at last, to drink from the lake instead of the cup, and so, in his own way, did the bitter young man. Neither of them changed what had happened to them. The losses were still losses. The old hurts were still real. What changed was the heart that held them. And that change always begins in the same place, with the simple and surprisingly difficult act of treating your own suffering as something worthy of kindness. So the whole of this path begins, strangely enough, at home, with the way you treat yourself on a hard day, with whether you can rest a hand on your own heart and offer it a little of the tenderness you give so freely to everyone else. This is not selfishness. It is the root from which all the rest grows. The first mud you must learn to meet with compassion is your own, and from that mud, a heart wide enough to hold the whole world can slowly begin to grow. You might begin in the smallest way. The next time you find yourself in pain, before you reach for the old harshness, you could say to yourself, silently, the way you would to someone you love, that this is hard, and that you are sorry it is hard, and that you are here. 3 small phrases. They will feel strange at first and perhaps untrue. Say them anyway. You are only learning, at long last, to stand on your own side. Pause now and offer yourself a moment of plain kindness. Breathe, soften, and let that warmth settle before we go on. We are taught, almost from the beginning, to hide our soft places, to appear strong, capable, untroubled. We learn early that to show our fear, our need, our hurt, is to be weak, and that weakness is dangerous. So we build armor. We present a smooth, unbroken surface to the world, and we keep the tender parts hidden, even from the people closest to us, sometimes even from ourselves. But something is lost in all that armoring. The Buddhist path points to a difficult truth here. The very softness we try so hard to hide is the doorway to nearly everything that matters most. It is the opening through which love comes in, and the opening through which compassion goes out. A heart sealed against its own vulnerability is also sealed against connection. The armor that keeps the pain out keeps the warmth out too. This is not weakness. The Buddhist teachers speak of the tender heart as a kind of courage. Pema Chodron writes often about what she calls the soft spot, the place in us that is raw and open and easily wounded, and she does not tell us to harden it. She tells us to treasure it, because that soft spot is the very seed of compassion. It is the part of us that can feel another person's pain as if it were our own. Without it, we are well defended, and we are alone. We do not build this armor out of foolishness. We build it because somewhere along the way, being open got us hurt, and we decided, often without knowing we were deciding, that it was safer never to be caught soft again. The armor made sense once, but we go on wearing it long after the danger has passed, into rooms full of people who only wish to love us, and we cannot understand why we feel so alone inside it. Our very capacity for compassion was born out of vulnerability. The human infant arrives more helpless than almost any creature on earth, unable to survive for a moment without care. And it was in answer to that helplessness that the tender, attuned, responsive heart developed, the heart that can sense another's need and move to meet it. Our compassion grew directly out of fragility, our own and others. We are, at the deepest level, made to reach toward what is vulnerable. It is one of the most beautiful things about us. The Buddha's own path began this way. He left his sheltered palace and met, for the first time, a person bent with age, a person burning with fever, and a body being carried to its rest. He did not look away. He let the fragile truth of life break his heart open, and out of that breaking came a compassion so vast that it has reached across thousands of years. His awakening did not begin with strength. It began with letting himself be touched. There is an image often used in Zen of meeting life with an open hand rather than a closed fist. The clenched fist looks strong, but it can hold nothing and feel nothing, and no one can take its hand. The open hand looks defenseless, and it is, but it is the only hand that can give, or receive, or be held by another. To live with an open hand is to be vulnerable. It is also the only way to truly touch anything at all. There is a story told of this. There was once a woman who was admired throughout her village for her strength. She had raised her children alone after her husband died young, and she had done it without ever once asking for help. She worked her own land, mended her own roof, and carried her own burdens, and she was proud of this, perhaps more proud than of anything else. "I have never needed anyone," she liked to say, and it was very nearly true. The village respected her, but no one felt close to her. When neighbors offered help, she refused it, a little coldly, as though the offer were an insult. When she was tired, or frightened, or grieving, she let no one see. She had built her whole life into a fortress, and from inside its walls she watched other people lean on one another, share their troubles, weep on each other's shoulders, and she told herself she was stronger than all of them. But on the long evenings, alone in her well-kept house, she was lonely in a way she would never have admitted to a living soul. One winter, she slipped on the ice and broke her leg badly, and for the first time in her life, she could not manage alone. She could not carry water or gather wood or even rise from her bed without help. For a day and a night she lay there, refusing to call out, until at last a neighbor, a younger woman, came to check on her and found her cold and unable to move. The neighbor did not scold her. She simply built up the fire and made soup and quietly sent for others. And over the following weeks, the village came. They brought food. They mended what needed mending. They sat with her in the evenings so that she would not be alone. Women she had kept at arm's length for years now sat at her bedside, laughing and talking, and one of them brushed and braided her hair as though she were a child. At first, she lay stiff with the discomfort of it, unsure what to do with so much care, certain she did not deserve it and would somehow owe it all back. But the village asked nothing in return, and slowly she let herself simply receive. The proud woman wept, which she had not done in front of anyone in longer than she could remember. "I do not know how to let people do this for me," she said to the young neighbor. "I have always been the one who needs nothing." "You have been alone a long time," the young woman answered, "not because no one wished to come near, but because you never once let them. We were always here. You only had to let us in." When her leg had healed, the woman was not the same. She had discovered that her armor, which she had worn so proudly all her life, had never been protecting her at all. It had only been keeping her alone. And in letting herself be weak, just once, she had finally found the closeness she had been starving for her whole life, without ever knowing it. Many of us are that proud woman, in our own way. We mistake our armor for strength. We believe that if we never show a soft place, never admit a need, never let our voice shake, we will be safe. And in a sense we are. We are safe the way a sealed room is safe. Nothing can get in to hurt us. But nothing can get in to warm us either. The strange truth is that our vulnerability is the very thing that draws others near. We do not love people for their flawless competence. We love them in the moments they let us see them, truly see them, in their fear, their tenderness, their need. When someone we admire finally shows us a soft place, our own heart opens toward them. We feel trusted, and we feel less alone in our own struggle. Vulnerability shared is what builds closeness between people. The walls we raise to protect ourselves are the same walls that keep us lonely behind them. To let yourself be seen in your need is not weakness. It is one of the bravest and most connecting things a person can ever do. It asks something of the other person too, the willingness to be let in, to be trusted with someone's soft place, and to handle it with care. When we open, and we are met with kindness rather than scorn, a bond forms that no amount of shared competence could ever create. We are bound to one another not by our strengths, which we tend to guard, but by our tender places, which we dare to share. And there is another story. There was once a man whose wife had died, and who could find no comfort anywhere. His friends spoke kind words to him, but the words seemed to slide away without reaching him. He could not bear the company of people, with their questions and their pity, and so each evening he walked alone to a still bend in the river, and sat on a flat stone at the water's edge, and stayed there until dark. People had mostly stopped visiting by then. They meant well, but their faces, full of sorrow on his behalf, only reminded him of what he had lost, and their kind questions asked him to find words for a grief that had no words. So he had come to prefer the river, and the silence, and the moving water that asked nothing of him at all. One evening a crane came to fish in the shallows nearby. It was a tall, pale bird, and at the first sight of the man it grew wary and still, ready to take to the air. But the man did not move toward it, or reach for it, or even seem to notice it. He simply sat in his sorrow, harmless and unmoving. And after a while, the crane went back to its fishing and let him be. The next evening the crane was there again, and the next. The man, who had no wish to disturb it, sat as still as he always did, and slowly the bird stopped fearing him. It fished closer and closer to where he sat. On some evenings it would stand for a long while on one leg in the shallows near his stone, doing nothing at all, simply present, the way he was simply present. The man came to look for it each evening, and to feel, when it was there, a little less alone in the world. He never touched the crane, and the crane never asked anything of him. But in his worst grief, when he could not stand the nearness of his own kind, this wild creature, which had every reason to fear him and none to trust him, chose to keep him company at the edge of the river, day after day. And somehow that wordless companionship reached him where human words could not. Sitting beside the bird in the failing light, he felt that he was not entirely cut off from the living world, that something in it still drew near to him, even in his sorrow, perhaps especially in his sorrow. Slowly, over that long season, the man began to heal, and he never forgot that it was a wild crane, asking nothing of him, that had first come close enough to remind him he was not alone. There is something in the world that reaches toward what is vulnerable. We see it in the crane drawn to the grieving man, and we feel it in ourselves whenever we meet another person's open sorrow and notice our own heart moving toward them. This reaching is not something we have to manufacture. It is already in us, woven through us, older than language. It is the empathy that grew up out of our own fragility, the part of us that cannot help but lean towards suffering with care. But it only flows freely when we let down our guard. As long as we are armored, we neither feel another's tenderness nor offer our own. The whole exchange of compassion, the giving and the receiving both, depends on a willingness to be open, to be soft, to be touched. This is why vulnerability is the doorway. It is the opening through which we reach one another and through which we are reached. Our soft places, the very things we are most tempted to hide, our grief, our fear, our need, are not our shame. They are our common ground. They are the mud we all share, and they are exactly where compassion takes root, in ourselves and between us. A person who has let their own heart be broken open can sit with almost anyone because they have stopped pretending to be invulnerable, and so they have nothing left to defend. The Buddhist teachers call the awakened compassionate one, a bodhisattva, and they do not picture this being as armored and untouchable. They picture a heart so open that it feels the suffering of others as its own and is moved, again and again, to help. That openness is not the bodhisattva's weakness. It is the whole of their strength. You might let yourself, in some small way, be a little more open than feels comfortable. To let someone see that you are tired, or afraid, or sad. To accept a hand when it is offered, instead of insisting that you are fine. Each time you do, you are not surrendering your strength. You are opening the door through which love has been trying, all along, to reach you. Let yourself rest with nothing to hold up and nothing to defend. Breathe easily, and we will continue together in a moment. There is a teaching in Buddhism that every being, without a single exception, carries within them a Buddha nature, a capacity for awakening, for wisdom, for love. It is there in the wise and the foolish, the kind and the unkind, the ones we admire and the ones we can hardly bear. It is there beneath every face we pass, however ordinary or closed or difficult that face may seem. The trouble is that we so rarely see it. We look at people and notice only the surface, the role they play, the mood they wear, the irritation, or the dullness, or the strangeness of them, and we miss the living being underneath. To truly see another person, past the mask to the one who is actually there, is one of the rarest and most healing things we can offer. Thich Nhat Hanh called this looking deeply. Not the quick, sorting glance that labels a person and moves on, but a slower, kinder attention that asks, who is really here, and what is this person carrying? The Buddhist teachers understood that this kind of seeing is itself a form of love. When we are truly seen, something in us unclenches. We feel, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that we are not invisible, that we matter, that someone has noticed the real person behind whatever we show the world. In Zen, people bow to one another and to the meditation cushion, and even to the bare wall they sit facing. The bow is not empty ceremony. It is a way of honoring the awakened nature present in each thing and each person, a way of saying, with the whole body, I see you, and I honor what you are. To meet another being with that kind of respect, to look at them and silently honor the Buddha nature within them, is to treat even the most ordinary encounter as something close to sacred. The Buddha taught his students to look upon every living being the way a mother looks upon her only child. To wish them well, to wish them safe, to wish them free from suffering, simply because they are alive and they suffer as we do. That is a way of seeing as much as it is a way of feeling. It means looking at a stranger and remembering that they too were once a small child, that they too are afraid of losing what they love, that they too only want to be happy and do not quite know how. Seen in that light, no one is entirely a stranger. There is a reason this matters so much. Every person we meet is carrying something we cannot see. Behind the gruff manner, the distant eyes, the short temper, the silence, there is almost always a private burden, a grief, or a fear, or an exhaustion that we know nothing about. We judge the surface, never guessing at the weight beneath it. There is an old saying that if we could see the hidden burdens other people carry, we would never again be tempted to look down on anyone. We would only ever want to be kind. We are bound to one another far more closely than we know. A single moment of being truly seen can change the whole course of a life, and the one who offered it usually never learns that it did. We hand someone a small kindness, scarcely noticing, and it lands in them more deeply than we could ever imagine. To see and to be seen is one of the unseen ways the mud of a hard life becomes bearable and even beautiful. We grow one another. An old story speaks to this. There was once a village teacher, a woman who had taught the children of her village for many years and was good at her work. But there was one boy in her class that year whom she found she simply could not like. He came to lessons unwashed and unkempt, his clothes worn thin, his hair uncombed. He was sullen and slow to answer, and he kept apart from the other children. When she looked at him, she felt a small, private distaste that she was not proud of but could not seem to shake. As the months went on, she found herself marking his work more harshly than the others and taking a certain grim satisfaction in his failures. She told herself he simply did not try. Then, near midwinter, it came time for the teacher to visit the home of each child and speak with the family, as was the custom in that village. She went to the boy's home last of all, almost reluctantly. And what she found there changed everything. The boy's mother had died 2 winters before. His father, broken by grief, had fallen ill and could barely rise from his bed. The boy, it turned out, woke before dawn each day to tend the fire and feed his father and care for their few animals, and only then walked to school, often without having eaten anything himself. The reason his clothes were worn was that there was no mother to mend them and no coin to spare for new ones. The reason he was tired and slow and silent was that he was a small child carrying a whole household on his shoulders, and not one person had known. The teacher stood in that cold, poor house and was ashamed of herself. She had looked at this child every day for months and seen only a sullen, dirty boy who would not try. She had never once seen the truth of him. From that day on, she was different with him. She no longer marked his work with that grim satisfaction. She found small ways to help. A warm meal slipped to him without fuss, a kind word, a patient hour after lessons were done. She began, simply, to see him. And the boy, who had felt invisible and disliked for so long, began to change under that attention, the way a plant turns toward the light. His work improved. Something in his face softened. He began, now and then, to smile. Many years later, long after the teacher had grown old, a letter came to her, and then another, and over the years a whole series of them, from that same boy. He had grown up and gone away to study and become a physician, a healer, respected in a distant city. In one of the letters he wrote words that she kept until the end of her days. "You were the first person who ever looked at me and saw someone worth saving," he wrote. "I do not know what would have become of me if you had not. You changed the whole direction of my life, and I do not think you ever knew it." She had only begun, one cold winter, to truly see him. She never guessed how much it had weighed. We almost never know the weight of our seeing, or of our failing to see. The teacher nearly missed the boy altogether. For months, she looked straight at him and saw only the surface, and it was not until she glimpsed the burden he carried that her heart finally turned, and her changed attention altered the course of his entire life. This is how it goes with most of the people around us. We see the mask, the mood, the behavior, and we judge it, usually without a trace of ill will, simply out of haste and habit. We decide that the silent woman is cold, that the gruff man is unkind, that the slow child does not try. And we are so often wrong, because we are reading only the surface of a story whose depths we know nothing about. We forget, too, how much it means to be on the other side of true seeing. To have someone look at us, past our worst day and our roughest edges, and find something there worth loving. It can save a person, not in some grand and dramatic way, but in the slow, plain way the boy was saved, by being made to feel, at long last, that he was not invisible after all. The remarkable thing is how little it took. The teacher did not perform a miracle. She gave the boy a warm meal, a patient hour, a kind word, and above all, her honest attention. These are things almost any of us can give, on almost any day. We tend to believe that to change a life, we must do something enormous. Far more often it is done by something small, offered to the right person at the right moment, by someone who finally troubled themselves to truly see. There is another story still. In a certain village there lived a woman whom no one liked. She came to the well and the market in silence, never smiling, never stopping to talk, her face always set and tired. When others greeted her, she gave the briefest answer and moved on. And so the village decided, among themselves, that she was cold and proud, that she thought herself above them. In the way these things go, they grew cold toward her in return. They left her out of things. They spoke of her unkindly once she had passed. One day, a young woman, newly come to the village, met this unsmiling woman at the well, and, not yet knowing she was supposed to dislike her, spoke to her warmly, and asked after her, and lingered a little. At first the older woman was startled, almost wary, but the young one was patient and kind, and after a time something in the older woman gave way, and she began, haltingly, to speak. She told the young woman that her mother lay bedridden at home, and had for years, that she rose through the night, again and again, to turn her, and tend her, and soothe her when she cried out in pain. That she had not slept a whole night through in longer than she could remember. That she came to the well and the market quickly, and spoke to no one, not out of pride, but because she was holding herself together by a single thread, and one kind word might undo her completely, and she could not afford to come apart, because there was no one else to care for her mother if she did. The young woman listened, and her own eyes filled, and she understood all at once how badly everyone had misjudged this woman. The coldness they had all resented was not pride at all. It was exhaustion. It was grief. It was a daughter's love, stretched almost past bearing. She told the others what she had learned, gently, and the village was ashamed. The coldness they had shown the woman melted into something else. Now, when she came to the well, someone would quietly take her bucket and fill it for her. Women began to come to her house and sit with her mother for an hour so that she could close her eyes and rest. The hardness the whole village had felt toward her, once they truly saw her, turned, almost overnight, into tenderness and into help. Nothing about the woman herself had changed. Only what they were able to see of her. And that had changed everything. And the unsmiling woman, who had braced herself against the world for so long, found that she could let a little of the weight be shared at last. She still did not smile easily. But now and then, at the well, when someone took her bucket from her hands, her tired face would soften for a moment, and that was its own kind of smile. The whole village had looked at that woman for years and seen only pride, when what was really there was a breaking heart. They judged the surface, never once imagining the weight beneath it. And the moment they could truly see her, every bit of their coldness turned to care. The woman had not become more worthy of kindness. She had always deserved it. They had simply, finally, seen her. This is true of nearly everyone we are tempted to judge. The person who cuts in front of us, who snaps, who seems cold or proud or careless, is almost always carrying something we cannot see. We do not have to excuse every harsh behavior to remember this. We need only hold, somewhere in the back of the mind, the simple likelihood that this person too is fighting a hard battle, and that if we knew what it was, our irritation would soften into something far kinder. To live this way, looking past the surface for the real person underneath, is one of the great practices of the heart. It will not always change the other person, but it will change us. It will keep our hearts open in the very moments they would otherwise slam shut. And every now and then, when we truly see someone who has long felt invisible, it will do something we may never even learn about. It will reach into a hidden, hurting place and remind a fellow being that they matter. We are far more bound up in one another than we know. We are, all of us, quietly saving and being saved, one act of true seeing at a time. Perhaps this is what the Zen bow has always meant. Not a gesture towards someone grander or holier than us, but a simple recognition that the person standing before us, whoever they are, is carrying a whole hidden life and is worthy, for that alone, of our care. Be still here for a breath. Let the face soften and the eyes rest, and simply notice that you are here and that you are enough. We move through life with a strong and constant feeling that we are separate, each of us sealed inside our own skin, our own thoughts, our own private world, looking out at everyone else as if across a gap. This sense of being a separate self is useful. We need it to function, to know where we end and the world begins. But the Buddhist teachers say it is not the deepest truth. Underneath it, woven into the very fabric of things, is a profound connection. We are not separate at all. We only seem to be. The Buddha taught this with a simple phrase. This is because that is. Nothing exists on its own. Everything that is held up by countless other things and could not be here for a single moment without them. He called this dependent origination, and it is among the deepest things he ever pointed to. Pull on any one thread of the world, and you find it tied to every other thread. Nothing stands alone. The teacher Thich Nhat Hanh gave this a beautiful name: interbeing. He liked to hold up a sheet of paper and say that if you look closely, you can see a cloud in it. Without the cloud, there would be no rain, and without the rain, no tree, and without the tree, no paper. And you can see the sunlight in it, and the earth, and the one who felled the tree, and the wheat that became the bread that fed that worker. The whole of the universe, he said, is present in a single sheet of paper. Nothing is only itself. Everything is. You can try this with anything at all. The cup you drank from this morning holds the potter who shaped it, the fire that hardened it, and the earth the clay was dug from. The clothes on your back hold the cotton, the field, the rain, the hands that wove the cloth, and the hands that stitched it. Look closely at any one ordinary thing, and the whole world is there, inside it, holding it up. And exactly the same is true of you. We can feel this. if we slow down enough to notice. The breath you are breathing now has passed through countless other lungs before it reached yours, and will pass through countless more after. The water in your body has been rain, and river, and ocean, and the blood of beings long gone. The food that became your flesh grew in soil made of everything that lived and died before you. You are not a separate thing set down into the world. You are the world, gathered for a little while into the shape of a person, and you are made entirely of everything that is not you. Zen has a short phrase that cuts straight to the heart of this. Not two. When we look deeply enough, the line we draw between self and other, between me and you, between us and the world, begins to blur and dissolve. There is no hard edge where one being stops and the next begins. We are not one undifferentiated blur, exactly. But neither are we two separate, sealed-off things. Not two. There is an old saying that holds both halves of what we are. Be humble, for you are made of earth. Be noble, for you come from the stars. We are of the soil, ordinary and mortal, kin to every growing and dying thing. And we are made of star matter as well, ancient and vast, kin to the farthest light in the sky. Either way, we belong. We were never separate. We were always part of the whole. Let us hear a story. There were once two villages on opposite sides of a mountain valley that had been enemies for as long as anyone could remember. No one quite recalled how the feud had begun, some old wrong, some insult passed down through the generations, but the hatred was carefully kept alive. Children on each side grew up learning that the people across the valley were cruel, dishonest, and barely human at all. The two villages did not trade, did not speak, did not mix. A man from one would no sooner help a man from the other than help a wolf. One late autumn, a man from the first village was crossing the high pass when a sudden, fierce snowstorm came down out of the sky. The wind howled, the snow blinded him, and he knew that if he did not find shelter soon, he would die on that mountain. Through the white he made out the dark shape of a small stone hut, a herder's shelter, and he stumbled toward it and pushed his way inside. There was already a man there, and in the dim light, each recognized the other at once for what he was, by his clothes, his manner, his speech. A man from the enemy village. For a long moment, they only stared at each other with the old hatred, two enemies trapped together in a tiny hut while the storm screamed outside. But the storm did not care about their feud. The cold did not care. As the night deepened and the temperature fell, the two men understood, without a word passing between them, that they would both freeze before morning unless they shared what they had. So, stiffly, warily, they built a single fire together. They sat near it, and then, as the hours wore on, nearer, because warmth was simply warmth. One had bread. The other had a little dried meat and a skin of wine. They shared it, because hunger does not respect a feud either. And somewhere in that long night, sharing fire and food, and the plain animal need to live until morning, they began, almost against their own will, to talk. One spoke of his children. The other, as it happened, had children of the very same age. One spoke of a hard harvest, and the other had suffered the same. They spoke of their fears, and their losses, and the people they had buried, and as they spoke, each man saw, with slowly dawning astonishment, that the other was not a monster at all. He was a man exactly like himself, frightened of the same things, loving the same things, carrying the same hopes and the same griefs across the very same mountain. By the time the storm broke and the morning came clear and bright, something had shifted in both of them that could not be shifted back. They walked down the mountain together as far as the place where their two paths divided. And there they stood a moment, two men who were meant to be enemies, not quite knowing what to say. "All my life I was told to hate your people," one said at last. "I do not think I can anymore. I have warmed my hands at your fire." "Nor I," said the other. "We are not so different, you and I. I am not sure we ever were." They did not end the feud between their villages that morning. Two men cannot do that alone. But each walked home carrying a secret that quietly worked on him for the rest of his days, the knowledge that, across the valley, behind the face of the enemy, there was only another person, no different from himself. And a thing like that, once truly seen, can never quite be unseen. The feud survived on a lie. The lie that the people across the valley were a different kind of creature, separate, other, lesser. It is the same lie that has fueled almost every cruelty in human history. We divide the world into us and them, and once a person has become one of them, we no longer feel their pain as quite real. The whole machinery of hatred runs on the belief that we are separate, and it falls apart the moment we truly meet. The two men in the hut could not hold on to their hatred once they had shared a fire and a meal and a long night's fear, once they had glimpsed each other's children in each other's eyes. Because beneath the labels, beneath the old story of enemy, there was only what there ever is. Two human beings, frightened and hoping and grieving in precisely the same way. Not two, the same life, looking at itself across a divide it had invented. This is why the Buddhist teachers say that compassion does not have to be forced. When the illusion of separation grows thin, compassion arises on its own, because we recognize the other's suffering as our own. We are made of the same mud. We are reaching toward the same light. And one more story. There was once a young monk who felt utterly alone in the world. He had no family living and no close friends, and though he lived among other monks, something in him felt cut off and separate, as if he were a single, isolated speck adrift in a vast and indifferent universe. One day, heavy with this loneliness, he went to his old teacher and confessed it. "I am alone," he said. "I have no one. I feel like a single thread with nothing attached to it, drifting in empty space." The old teacher listened and then offered neither comfort nor argument. Instead, he picked up the monk's empty rice bowl and set it on the table between them. "Tell me," he said, "where did your rice come from this morning?" The young monk shrugged. "From the kitchen." "And before the kitchen?" "From the farmer who grew it, I suppose." "Yes," said the teacher. "And that farmer, who fed him? Who wove the clothes on his back? Who forged the blade he cut the rice with? Who taught him as a boy to plant? And the rice itself, what fed it? The rain. And what is the rain but the rivers and the sea drawn up into the sky? And what warmed it enough to grow? The sun, that great fire older than this whole world. And the soil it grew in, made of every leaf and every creature that ever lived and died on this land, going back and back, beyond all counting." The teacher turned the empty bowl slowly in his hands. "In this one bowl of rice," he said, "there is the farmer, and his parents, and their parents before them. There is the rain and the river and the sea. There is the sun and the soil, and 10,000 years of living and dying. Countless hands and countless beings and the whole turning earth came together so that you could eat this morning. And you tell me you are a single thread with nothing attached to it. He smiled. My child, there is no such thread anywhere in this universe. You could not draw a single breath or eat a single grain without the whole of creation holding you up. You are not alone. You have never once been alone. You are held in every moment by more than you could ever begin to count. The young monk looked at the empty bowl for a long time, and something in his chest that had been clenched and cold for as long as he could remember slowly began to open and warm. He had believed he was a speck adrift in emptiness. He saw now that he was woven into everything, held by everything, made of everything. He was not separate from the world. He was the world, briefly awake and grateful to be so. The young monk's loneliness was real, but it rested on a misunderstanding, the same one the two villagers had lived under, the belief that we are separate, sealed off things. We are not. We never were. Every breath, every meal, every moment of our lives, we are being held up by the whole of the world. We are made of others. We could not exist for an instant on our own. When this truly lands, even for a moment, two things happen. The loneliness eases because we see that we were never the isolated speck we feared we were. And the heart opens because we see that the suffering of others is not separate from our own. To harm another is to harm a part of ourselves. To care for another is to care for the whole that we are both a part of. Compassion stops being a duty we must remember and becomes simply the natural way of a heart that has seen how things actually are. This is the root of what the Buddhist tradition calls the Bodhisattva's vow, the promise to live for the good of all beings. It can sound impossibly grand until you see where it actually comes from. It does not come from duty or from imagining ourselves better or holier than anyone else. It comes from the simple recognition that there are no others. Not in the end. There is one life, wearing countless faces, and to ease the suffering of any one of them is to ease the suffering of the whole. Once you have felt your own connection to everything, even a single time, caring for the world is no longer a weight laid upon you. It becomes the most natural thing there is. We are made of earth, humble and mortal, kin to the mud itself. And we are made of stars, ancient and luminous. And we are made of one another, woven together so tightly that no single thread can be pulled free. The mud that we each must wade through, the grief, the fear, the loss, is the mud we all share, and it does not divide us. It binds us together. We suffer together, and we wake together. No one ever blooms alone. Settle for a moment into the breath you share with every living thing. Feel it come and go, and rejoin whenever you are ready. There is a phrase that may be the most well-known of all in the Buddhist world. Om Mani Padme Hum. It is chanted in temples and on mountain paths, carved into stone, turned in prayer wheels, whispered like a heartbeat across many lands. Its meaning, at the simplest, is this: the jewel is in the lotus. The jewel is the awakened heart, the treasure of compassion and wisdom that every being carries. And the lotus, as we have seen all along, is the flower that grows up out of the mud. So the phrase tells us where the jewel is to be found. Not in some pure and distant place, far from the troubles of life. The jewel is in the lotus, and the lotus is in the mud. The treasure we are looking for is hidden inside the very difficulties we would most like to escape. This is where everything we have walked through comes together. We have spent these hours in the mud. We have seen that the hard seasons are the path and not a detour. We have learned to stop thrashing, to set down the second arrow, to meet our own pain with kindness, to bring a warm presence to what is difficult. And all of it has been leading somewhere. It has been leading to the flower and to the jewel hidden inside it, to the opening of a heart that, having met its own suffering, turns now toward the suffering of the world. This is what happens when a heart truly heals. It does not close back up around itself, guarding its hard-won peace. It opens outward. A person who has suffered and has met their suffering with compassion becomes, almost without trying, a source of compassion for others. The jewel of the awakened heart is not a private treasure to be enjoyed alone. By its very nature, it shines outward. The mud grows the lotus reveals the jewel, and the jewel is love, turning toward all beings. This is why the old mantra is repeated so endlessly, until it becomes as natural as breathing. Om Mani Padme Hum. The jewel in the lotus. It is a reminder, said again and again across a whole life, that what we most deeply seek is not somewhere else. It is not waiting in some easier life we were never given. It is right here, inside the very life we are living, hidden in the very difficulties we are facing, waiting to be uncovered. The Zen tradition tells the whole path to awakening in a series of 10 pictures, the ox-herding pictures, which trace a person's long search for their own true nature. And it is worth noticing where the series ends. Not with the seeker sitting alone on a mountaintop, serene and removed from the world. The final picture shows the awakened one walking back down into the marketplace, into the ordinary bustle of life, among the buyers and the sellers and the crowds, with open hands and an open heart, helping wherever help is needed. The journey does not end in private peace. It ends in a return to the world, to be of use to it. That return is the whole point. There is a story that holds all of this. There was once a woman who kept a small house at the edge of a town where travelers and the troubled often came to rest. Over the years, she became known, far beyond that town, for something rare. She could sit with people in their darkest hours, with the grieving and the despairing and the heavy-hearted, and bring them comfort when no one else could. People would come from a long way off, simply to sit in her kitchen and be heard by her. They said that something in her presence eased the heart. A young man who helped in the house watched her do this for many months and could not understand it. He saw hardened, bitter people soften in her presence. He saw the inconsolable find a little peace. One evening, after a weeping stranger had finally gone to bed calmed, he asked her how she did it. "How do you know what to say to them?" he asked. "I never know. I stand there, useless, afraid of saying the wrong thing. But you always seem to reach them." The woman was quiet for a moment. "I do not say very much at all," she said. "Mostly I just sit with them. The words matter far less than people think. But how are you not afraid of their pain?" The young man pressed. "Their grief would frighten me. I would not know where to begin." She looked at him for a long while, and then told him something she rarely spoke of. She told him about a season, many years before, when she had lost nearly everything she loved, one thing after another, until she had sat in a dark room for the better part of a year, certain she would never feel anything but sorrow again. She told him how slowly, and with the help of one patient soul who refused to leave her side, she had found her way back to the living. After that, she said, their grief does not frighten me, because I have been where they are. When a grieving person looks at me, they can see that I am not speaking to them from some safe, untouched place. They can see that I have been down in the dark too, and that I came back. And that, more than any words, is what gives them hope. Not advice, not comfort, just the sight of someone who has walked through the same fire and is sitting here, whole, beside them. The young man understood then. Her gift for easing suffering was not in spite of her own great suffering. It had grown directly out of it. The very darkness she had passed through had become the source of the light she now offered to others. I would not wish that year on anyone, she said, but I will tell you the truth. I would not trade it either. It is the reason I can do the one thing in my life that has ever truly mattered. This is the jewel in the lotus, made plain. The woman's compassion, the thing that allowed her to reach the unreachable, did not come from a life of ease. It grew out of her hardest season, the very mud she would never have chosen. Her suffering, met and survived, became a depth of understanding that no untouched person could offer. She had become what is sometimes called a wounded healer, one who can help precisely because they themselves have been broken and have mended. Many of the people who have eased our own suffering were like this. The ones who truly reached us were rarely the ones who seemed to have everything figured out. They were the ones who had been through something themselves, and so could meet us without flinching and without pity, without that subtle distance the untouched cannot help but keep. They could sit with us in the mud because they knew the mud. They had grown their own flower there. This is the strange grace hidden inside our difficulties. The very things we suffer can become, in time, the gifts we have to give. The mud we wade through grows a flower whose fragrance is for others. Nothing is wasted. Even our worst seasons, met with presence and compassion, are quietly preparing us to be of use to someone who will one day stand where we once stood. You may already be carrying such a gift without knowing it. The hardest thing you have ever lived through may turn out to be the very thing that lets you sit, one day, with someone caught in the same fire and offer them the one thing they truly need, which is the company of someone who understands from the inside. Your mud is not only yours. In time, it can become medicine for others. And there is a last story. There was once a man so weighed down by his own sorrows that he could see nothing else. He had suffered real losses, and he turned them over and over in his mind until they filled his entire world. He went from teacher to teacher seeking relief, asking each one to take his pain away, and none could. At last he came to an old woman known for her wisdom, and he begged her, as he had begged the others, to free him from his suffering. She listened to his long account of his troubles. Then she said something he did not expect. "I cannot take your pain from you," she said, "but I can give you a task. There is a village 2 days' walk from here that was struck by a flood this season. The people there have lost their homes and their stores, and many are sick and frightened and alone. Go to them and do whatever you can. Stay until the first frost. Then come back and tell me how your suffering is." The man was bewildered and a little offended. He had come for healing, not for labor. But he had tried everything else, and so he went. In the flooded village he found hardship far greater than his own. He helped raise a new roof for a family with small children. He carried water and food to an old man who could not walk. He sat through the night beside a frightened woman whose husband had fallen ill. He listened to people's grief and held their hands and did the small, hard, ordinary work of caring for others who had almost nothing left. And a strange thing happened, so slowly that he did not notice it at first. As his days filled with the needs of others, his own sorrow, which had once filled his whole world, grew quieter. It did not vanish. His losses were still real, but they no longer swallowed him, because his heart was busy with something larger than itself. In easing the pain of others, he had loosened the grip of his own. When the first frost came, he walked back to the old woman, and he understood, before he even reached her, what she had done. "You did not take my pain away," he said. "You gave me something better. You gave me other people to care for, and in caring for them, I forgot to drown in myself." The old woman smiled. "Pain turned only inward festers," she said. "The same pain turned outward, toward others, becomes compassion. You came to me with a wound. You leave with a gift. They were always the same thing. You only had to turn it around." This is the last turn of the path, and in some ways the most important. The peace we find by meeting our own suffering is real, but it was never meant to be hoarded. It is meant to flow outward. The despairing man did not heal by digging ever deeper into his own pain. He healed by lifting his eyes to the pain of others and discovering that his heart had been made for exactly that. The jewel of compassion is not something we polish in private. It shines only when we turn it toward the world. There is a practice as old as Buddhism for this turning of the heart. It begins by bringing to mind a single person who is having a hard time. Someone you know, perhaps, or someone you have only heard of. You picture them, and you let your heart wish for them what you would wish for yourself. May you be at peace. May you be free from your suffering. May you be held as I have been held. And then, slowly, the circle widens. From that one person to the people near them, to strangers, to the ones you find difficult, to every being, everywhere, who is wading through their own mud, which is to say, to everyone alive. May they all be at peace. May they all be free. This is the boundless heart the Buddhist teachers speak of. The heart with no edges, that leaves no one out, not even ourselves. We do not arrive there all at once. We grow toward it, the way the lotus grows, slowly, through the dark, reaching for the light. But each time we turn our compassion outward, even a little, the flower opens a little wider, and the jewel inside it shines a little more brightly. This is where the whole path has been leading, down into the mud, and up through the difficult and the tender, until the flower opens and reveals the jewel, and the jewel turns out to be love, freely given to all. The light we find in our own dark seasons was never meant to stay our own. It is meant to be passed on, from one heart to the next, the way a single candle lights another, and then another, until a whole dark room is full of warmth, and no one can tell anymore where the first small flame began. And so the path that began in the mud ends in light, given away. The difficulty that once seemed only to take from us turns out to have been growing something all along, a flower, a jewel, a flame to share. This is the promise hidden inside the whole of it. No mud, no lotus, and no lotus that was ever meant to bloom for itself alone. Rest here a while, with an open heart, leaving no one outside of it, not even yourself. Stay as long as you like, and we will come gently to the close. We began tonight with a single, simple truth. The lotus grows in the mud, and everything since has been an unfolding of what that means for a human life. The truth at the center of it is this: the difficulty you would most like to escape is not in the way of your peace. It is the ground your peace grows from. This runs against almost everything we are taught. We spend our lives trying to arrange things so that nothing hard will ever touch us, and we treat each loss, each fear, each painful season as a mistake, a wrong turn, proof that something has gone wrong. But a life without difficulty was never on offer to anyone. Difficulty is woven into the fabric of being alive. The only real choice we are given is not whether the mud comes, but how we meet it. And how we meet it changes everything. Two people can live through the very same hardship and come out of it changed in opposite directions. One of them hardened and closed, the other somehow deepened and more open than before. The pain itself is rarely what hardens us. What hardens us is the fighting, the blaming, the rushing, the long story we tell ourselves about whose fault it is and what it must mean about us. Set that story down, and the pain alone, met with presence and a little kindness, does not destroy us. It deepens us. It softens us. It grows something. This is the whole of the practice, and it is simpler than it sounds. When the hard thing comes, do not flee from it, and do not drown in it. Turn toward it with a warm and patient attention, the way you would sit beside a friend who is hurting. Be tender with the one who is suffering, which is you. That warmth is the alchemy. It is what slowly turns the mud into a flower. And the flower, when it opens, does not bloom for itself alone. The peace you find by meeting your own pain was never meant to be kept. A heart that has been through the dark and come back is a heart that can sit with anyone because it has stopped pretending to be untouched. Your own hardest seasons, in time, become the very thing that lets you reach another person in theirs. The mud becomes medicine. The wound becomes a gift you did not know you were being given. And underneath all of it lies the deepest truth of the whole path. We were never as separate as we feel. We are made of one another, held in every moment by more than we could ever count. Your suffering is not only yours, and neither is your healing. We wade through the same mud, and we reach toward the same light, and no one was ever meant to bloom alone. Let us end where we began, with a story. There was once a monastery known across the whole region for its lotus pond. In summer, people would travel for days simply to stand at its edge, because the flowers that rose from it were larger and more luminous than any others in the land, and their fragrance drifted so far on the wind that you could smell the pond long before you could see it. To stand before those lotuses even once was something people remembered for the rest of their lives. The pond was tended by an old woman who had cared for it since she was a girl. One spring, a young monk, newly arrived at the monastery, was given the task of helping her. On his first morning, he walked down to the water, expecting to find a clear and sacred spring, something as pure as the flowers were beautiful. Instead, he found the pond fed by a muddy channel that ran down from the village above, carrying with it the runoff of the whole town, the washwater and the silt, and all the things a village lets go of. The water was dark and clouded, and it troubled him. "Surely this is a mistake," he said to the old woman. "These are the most famous flowers in the land. They deserve clean water, pure water from the mountain. Not this. Look at what the village sends down to them." The old woman went on raking the silt at the pond's edge, and she smiled. "We tried that once," she said. "Long ago, when I was a girl myself. A wealthy man who loved the flowers had a fine stone channel built all the way from the mountain spring, so that nothing but the purest water would ever reach our pond. He believed he was honoring the lotuses. We were all grateful to him. And what happened?" the young monk asked. "By the next summer," she said, "the flowers had grown small and pale. The summer after that, most of them did not open at all. The pure water gave their roots nothing to feed on. We could not understand it. We had given them the very best of everything, and they were dying." She set down her rake and looked out over the dark water. "So we broke open the old channel again and let the village water come back. The muddy water, the water full of everything washed away and cast off. And within 2 seasons, the great flowers had returned, more radiant than before. The very thing the wealthy man had wanted to protect them from was the one thing they could not live without." The young monk stood without speaking for a long while. "So the mud is not a flaw in the pond," he said at last. "It is the reason for the flowers." "It is the only reason for the flowers," she said. "People come from far away to praise the blooms, and not one of them thinks to thank the mud. But the mud is doing all the patient work below. The flower is only the mud, lifted at last into the light." That evening, before the young monk left her, the old woman cut a single lotus and pressed it into his hands. He thought she meant it as a gift to keep, and he thanked her for it. But she shook her head. "It is not for you to keep," she said. "When the petals fall, save the seeds. And wherever your life takes you, whatever poor muddy little pond you come upon, plant one. Most people will see only mud and walk on past. You will know better. You will know what is waiting inside it." The young monk carried that flower with him for the rest of his days. He saved its seeds, and he planted them in pond after pond, in still and unpromising waters where no one thought anything lovely could grow. And long after he was gone, in waters all across the region, lotuses he had never lived to see went on rising up out of the mud and opening, one after another, into the light. You do not need to carry any of this away with you. If a single image stayed, or a single feeling, let that be enough. The rest will do its slow work in its own time, the way seeds do, in the dark, when no one is watching them. So be easy now. Whatever you are living through, whatever mud you are standing in tonight, trust that it is not the end of your story, and not a detour from it, but the ground where something is already, quietly, taking root. The lotus does not resent the mud. It feeds on it, and rises, and opens into the light. So, in time, will you? Wherever you are welcome here, exactly as you are, with whatever you are carrying and whatever you are ready to set down. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk.